Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this last economy and development of this civic year. You're very, very welcome this morning. We've got some special guests who have joined us from Powys County Council today. We've got Councillors Gwilym Williams, Karen Laurie Parry and Roger Williams, who've come to view our select committee. This is their first of a number of visits to examine how we do scrutiny here within the county, and we're obviously joined by one of our former colleagues, Jeff Burrows. You're very welcome here this morning, and I look forward to having a meeting afterwards just to discuss what your thoughts and feelings were, and I hope you can take some elements of best practice back to Powys County Council and your scrutiny work. Before we go into the agenda items, if we do a brief introduction around the table, or around the chamber, should I say, and because we've got a number of officers here for specific presentations this morning. So I'm Councillor Paul Pavia and I'm chair of this committee.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Paul Harris, Democratic Services.
James Woodcock, Business Insights Manager.
Rachel Lewis, Planning Policy Manager.
Mark Hand, Head of Planning, Housing and Place Shaping.
Of Enterprise and Community Development.
Armand Watts, County Councillor for Thornwell.
Debbie Blakeborough, County Councillor for Trellick United Area and Vice Chair of this committee.
Richard Roden, Councillor in Monmouth and a member of this committee.
Roger Harris, County Councillor for Cressona Ward in Abergavenny.
Jez Becker, County Councillor for St Mary's Ward in Chepstow, member of the committee.
Brian Strong, member for Usk and a member of this committee.
David Dovey, Councillor St Kingsmark Ward, Chepstow and a committee member.
Councillor Val Smith, observing.
Okay, thank you very much, and obviously welcome to Councillors Harris and Councillor Smith. Always welcome observers here, and you're very, very welcome to ask questions as well of officers during the various presentations. So if we go into item 1, apologies for absence. Do you have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies this morning from County Councillors Alan Davis and Matt Figgins.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations you'd like to make me aware of at this stage? No, as and when. Okay. If there are any, obviously you have the relevant paperwork in front of you. If you can fill that out and return it to Paul at the end of the session, that'd be great. Item 3, to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any concerns with the minutes, or would you like to propose them as an accurate record? Do you have a seconder? Councillor Roden, thank you. Thank you very much. Item number 4 is the public open forum. We do not have any members from the public to present to us this morning. So agenda item 5 is the presentation on City Deal. As Kelly Byrne, Chief Officer and Deputy Chief Exec, is going to present to this. She's unfortunately running late at the minute. So can I make a proposal that we move item 6 up the agenda and we take that first? You're all happy for that? Yeah, okay. So item 6 then is the Economies of Future Analysis update. I'm sure colleagues have gone through the interim report. The rationale for this is that our strategic plan as a local authority comes to an end in 2020. As members are well aware, with the development of City Deal and changes, major changes like the removal of the tolls, the economic impact on Monmouthshire is going to be significant, and has changed and those concepts have changed our strategic plan quite radically in the last 3 years. So it was pertinent, I think, that we look at a new economic regeneration strategy, which obviously runs in line in parallel with our review of our LDP. So they knit together very, very well indeed. So if I introduce the officers then to come in. Are you going to start, Kath? Yeah, thank you, Kath.
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to give an overview of where we are to date, really, with a view to provide an opportunity for some feedback ahead of an all-members workshop we have set for the 11th of May. In terms of the overview report, as Councillor Pevia has given a very good introduction, really, in terms of where we were, we have we're in the process of informing a new strategy for not only for economic development and business growth, but also for the local development plan. And it seemed an obvious thing for us to do as colleagues to work together to enable us to have a document that will help us to capitalise on our forthcoming regional opportunities and also address our economic issues at a county level. So the paper itself just gives an idea of where the research has been focused. So if I sort of take to point 3.3, where in the overview paper where we have really been looking at our most appropriate growth sectors, we've looked at that will help us provide the economies of the future for the county, a detailed observational study of the accommodation and locational needs of those growth sectors to ensure that we have the right availability going forward, particularly in terms of suitability and deliverability of our sort of current employment sites. Are they in the right place? Do we need to be looking elsewhere? Also an indication of the skill sets that will be required as we move forward, and whether or not it's feasible for Monmouthshire citizens to meet the needs of those growth sectors, or whether we need to be looking to attract labour from elsewhere, if so where. An assessment of our current populations in order to sustain the economic growth in the county, looking at potential inward migration required to develop and sustain those growth sectors, potentials for a possible new settlement, and then modelling some scenarios and associated ambition targets, really, to ensure that we're in the right place. We've been talking with yourselves as a committee in terms of marketing strategy then to move that forward, but we felt there was a need really to be working on sort of a very strong baseline data, and then also looking at our economic and population impacts on our existing retail sectors and what we need to do with that area going forward, and obviously the impact of this on our Indigenous population and house prices and what we need to do to offset any negative impact. The whole of this really would look then to provide us with a draft scalable inward investment strategy and really looking at a cost-effective method for us to attract these new growth sectors. So in terms of where we are to date, we've had some headline information which we will build on in the members seminar, but we just wanted to share with you with those at the moment. In terms of the economy, in the last 15 years, we've been advised that the economy's performed below its potential and lower than other comparators, which is mirrored by our employment trends. It's a small-scale economy when compared to the wider Cardiff capital region, but particularly, you know, if you look at population and employment and number of businesses, that would be to be expected. However, our population age is really quite strikingly different and low in terms of our working age populations, where our median age is 48, and then you compare that to Cardiff that's 34. That's quite a distinction, really, and we need to look, if we're looking to expand and to sustain our economy going forward, that's something that we'll need to address, really. So we've also been looking at current employment forecasts, which currently are low, and then looking at how things we may need to do, will need to do in order to address this, really, to look at some growth. How significant that could be will be discussed in the members' seminar, really, and if that's required, we will be looking to develop some radical policies, really, that would enable this higher economic growth. So it's really looking at, you know, the seminar as we go forward, we'll be looking really to test some of those scenarios to see how members feel about that, really. So really what we're very much looking forward to developing is a new economic regeneration strategy, very much about providing jobs for our communities in the future, identifying and supporting housing and commercial infrastructure, really so that we're able to provide the right conditions, really, for growth going forward. We, as you know, we have a dual economy where we have a lot of out commuting. It's 40%, and it's the out commuting is skewed towards high skill occupations, whereas the other direction of flow is very much skewed towards lower level skills. So that's something that we need to look at. In terms of employment sectors, our manufacturing is relatively large and growing, which is bucking a national trend, which is really positive, along with our business and professional and scientific base is growing and could grow more. And the arts, entertainment and recreation sector is growing well and is well represented. But really, they suggested some growth in terms of approximately 1,200 jobs in Monmouthshire between 2017 and 2037. Clearly, this could be exceeded towards the 3,000 mark, but it's not just about numbers, it's also about the creation of high-value jobs, really, that aligns them with the Cardiff Capital Region strategy that Kelly Burr will talk to you about later. So it's how we align what we're doing at a county level with the wider regional economy, really. So really, in terms of going forward and our drivers for growth, we'll need to identify the best routes to draw businesses into the county, how we look to address our commuting whilst also retaining our high value occupations, how we augment our existing growth sectors and generate population growth, but very much targeted towards a working age population, looking at our housing sites and affordability of housing, which is also addressed and looked at as part of the social justice strategy which goes to Cabinet next week. So and then really aligning that in terms of our availability of and quality of employment sites and our geographic differences, really. So it's very much really to draw some of these conclusions together to provide an opportunity to discuss with sort of findings to date, baseline reports to date, with a view to sort of informing the future strategy. So open to questions with colleagues, really.
Okay. So if we open up the questions, can I just remind colleagues to make sure you put your microphones on when you ask your relevant questions. Councillor Blakeborough, did you want to start?
Thanks. Really interesting report. I don't think we're surprised by it because we constantly talk about these issues, but it's good to kind of see it all together. Obviously, looking forward, it's trying to get a balance so that we have the right development, and there's always this balancing between what we preserve and what we develop. So the set of questions is around getting that baseline. So, what is the vision? What do we want Monmouthshire to look like, feel like, be like? What are we aiming for? So from that, is there any data where we've asked residents, why did you move to Monmouthshire in the first place? What attracted you to come here in the first place? And why do people stay here? I'm thinking for myself, I moved here because it was quick access to M4 and the schools. I stay here now because the people are beautiful and the scenery is beautiful and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So I think that's sort of interesting in terms of just getting what it is we want from Monmouthshire. In the report, you said that 40% travel out of Monmouth for work and suggested it's high-skilled occupations. Any breakdown of information as to what particular jobs are those? What's the employment profile for that? Because I think that might give us some hints as to maybe what jobs we do need to develop in Monmouthshire. Looking at the population age structure, and we are getting this massive gap, as you were saying, and definitely the over 75s are on the increase, going to put a huge pressure on our social care budget, which is already under stress at the minute. But what are the barriers to working people living in Monmouth, particularly those under 45s? I do have a question around digital inclusion. Obviously, I have, Kath, I would ask this question, but I'll leave that for later on if that's okay. Thanks.
Okay. Jay, you happy if we do a bit of I was going to say double act, probably a quadruple act on the questions. In terms of balancing the development versus what we want to preserve, absolutely. That's an integral part of the whole LDP process. So that's probably where that main aspect of work will be presented. The question about the vision of Monmouthshire, again, that's an integral part of the LDP and one of the first stages. But in terms of the question about why people were attracted here and why they've stayed, I think we've asked the community's questions about what they like about Monmouthshire as part of the wellbeing plan, but that's not quite the same. It's similar to what we've asked, but not quite the same. So this is something we could look at and potentially weave into the LDP vision work, and use the networks that our colleagues doing the wellbeing plan used to find that out. The other question that I picked up on you'd asked was what kind of high-skilled occupations are growing or will be growing. They have looked at that as part of the research, haven't they, Kath? And that will certainly be part of the presentation. I can't remember off the top of my head what the main growth areas were. There's a bit in Appendix A, though. So one of our interesting things was around manufacturing, which is growing disproportionately compared to the UK. We're bucking the trend. I'm just trying to find it now. In James's notes, there were some bullet points in there. It's on the second page, so about halfway down it says current employment sectors analysis. So that's looking at areas that are currently doing well. So there's two sides to the question, sorry, looking at this again. What the consultants have done is looked at our current employment sectors that are doing well. And there's a graph they'll probably show us that looks at what's growing UK-wide, how are we doing in Monmouthshire, and then what kind of proportion of our employment base is made up from those. And it kind of tends to make you focus on the ones that we have a high proportion of and are growing. That'll be a natural place for us to look. And then they're also doing some more work on what are the growing sectors. I think without carrying on for too long, that's quite a challenging area because there's so many things might change in future years and we don't fully know. When we talk about the 7 tolls, we're quite often talking about commuting and houses, but there's quite a lot of potential, I would suggest, for business growth as well. Our land is typically cheaper here. We have some good connections, so there might be businesses move over, not just housing development. So we need to think through all of that.
Any other? I don't think your questions are fully answered there, were they?
Yes, what are the barriers to working, people living in Monmouth? What do you think those barriers are?
Sorry, Chair, I missed that one. Oh,
it's okay, I can pick it up. I would suggest, as you would expect me to say, really a lot of it was broadband infrastructure. And that's something we really need to look at going forward. It is a cause for concern and something that we speak to Welsh Government on a very regular basis about. We are due to speak to them again. I think we said the 9th of July, didn't we, Hazel, in terms of bringing Welsh Government in. So it's just something we need to lobby about all the time, because it's not just about the barriers to people living and working in Monmouthshire, it's also about the issue in terms of encouraging more people to work from home, because when you work from home you tend to shop more locally, the economy improves, there's all those different things that come with that. Also about digital inclusion for us, how we get some of our services online as a local authority as well, so it's absolutely critical. So something that we need to be lobbying about all the time. I'd say that was one of the main barriers, really.
Yeah, follow on. Yeah.
Because I had a whole load of questions around the digital inclusion. Exactly what you're saying. People are wanting to work from home. They want to set up small businesses, and it's a huge block. So the question was around how big a barrier is our probably not being prioritised in phase 2 going to have on this particular strategy. You've answered the question. If we're not prioritised, could have a huge knock-on effect. Thanks.
Do you want to come in, Mark?
Yeah, just to mention, I think the other key barrier we've already touched on is around affordability. Again, I think at the moment a lot of that's kind of our belief and our suspicion. We need to get some more data behind that, I think, some evidence. There's probably a myriad of reasons why people in the 20s to 45 age bracket are not staying here. It might be nothing to do with house prices. It might be jobs, which is linked in. They might just go off to university, meet somebody, go off and live where they're from or whatever. So we need to try and dig that into that as much as we can. But we certainly suspect that affordability is a large chunk of the problem. And that is something that we can look to tackle via the planning process. But really it's getting some of that data and evidence.
Okay, you satisfied with that? Yeah. Just on the same track, because I know Councillor Watts has asked a number of times in previous committees about what the attraction is. So do you want to follow up on that, Councillor Watts?
Yeah, I was just talking to just talking to people that have lived here a long time, that have, I guess, kind of professional people, but I talk to people in the chip shop about this as well, is that why do you come and live here? And it's the reasons that Debbie gave, really, is that it's the kind of quality of life issue. So I suspect, you mentioned about the data from Cardiff and doing the comparables between, the people that work here, the age group and stuff. I suspect it is those people that have enjoyed a single or fun, hedonistic life in the city, then decided that, kids have kind of caught up with them for whatever reason, and then they're faced with the reality that they've got to live somewhere as a couple and bring up their children. So Monmouthshire really is a decent proposition, really, isn't it? They might come back. But then you're faced with then the affordability of housing for the existing population, which we've touched on, and then also the additional growing deprivation when you add then house prices to the family outgoings and the increase in child poverty as well. That's significant, isn't it? So we need to address that. But I guess so are we seriously, when we talked about a new settlement, how are we going to provide affordable housing? So when you take into account, I've mentioned this many times before, but in Thornwell, which is right, just for the members that don't know, it's right on the edge of the Severn Bridge there. A 3-bedroom former council house would cost you £200,000. I think Kelly mentioned before that earnings to value of property is something like 9% now, where the average is 6% in Wales. And I think UK-wise, and I'm sure this data is old, as you say, it needs to be updated, that Chelsea and Kensington, it's 13 times earnings. So we're obviously catching up with Bristol, and that's only going to be exacerbated when the bridge tolls come down. So what are you doing, my question is, to address that in as far as the new settlement? Are we going to start building council houses? Are we going to start to build social housing? What does that look like? And how many houses would there be?
Do you want to answer that, Mark, first?
They're not questions I can answer at the moment. They're all things that need to come out through the LDP. So, new settlement is just an idea that we're banding around at the moment. If that's an idea to go with, it needs to be based on reasons and evidence. That's the way to deliver growth, and that's the right level of growth. So I guess the first issue is, what are the problems that we're starting to talk about now? Then what are the levels of growth that we think we should have in order to address those problems? And then the third question is, how do we deliver that growth? And that's when you start talking about, where does the housing go? How do you deliver the infrastructure to support that, affordable housing and all of that? Alongside that, we'll have to look at development viability and the other things we're after. So we're looking at our affordable housing targets, but almost separately, but not entirely separately, we need to think about how the housing's delivered. So I think I've spoken before about when we have a few big sites, we end up with the 5 PLCs, house builders, and not many other people have the option of going in there. They definitely have a role in life. They're the key way that we get affordable housing at the moment. But if we were to look at other smaller sites, it might bring more people into the market. Smaller house builders, we know that our 3 RSLs operating here have got their own arm's length development arms now, so they're bringing a different model in. Obviously, that's a proportion of affordable and a proportion of market, but because their profit margins are so much lower, they're more viable and we're getting more from them. So there's ways in which we can encourage them. And then there's also other bits, slightly outside of the planning system in terms of how we deliver in housing. So yeah, there are conversations starting about, do we start doing some house building ourselves? How do we get from where we are now to that? We're a long way off at the moment. I guess the planning link in that is looking at, to an extent, the sites we have. If somebody, a member of the public owned a bit of land, it's up to them who they sell the land to and how it's developed. If we own the land, we have a bit more control over what comes of it. So there's a bit of a divide there, a paper divide between MCC as landowner and planning considerations. But we do need to have a bit of a think about how a site's delivered, what do we get out of them in terms of the outcomes and the placemaking, and are there some slightly ingenious ways of doing things a bit differently.
And just that, if I may, just that little bit about the risk that we have of allowing house prices to get away with us, and then when you look at earnings, and then you look at deprivation, particularly in my ward. I mean, statistically, I read the other day when you add house prices or rent onto it, I've got just under 30%, or around about 30% of the children in my ward are living in deprivation now. Well, I know David's fed up. Just 2 miles up the road, we've got the wealthiest ward in Wales. Now, that can't be right. What are you doing to, create a greater level of social mobility? What's your strategy for that?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, we have got the social justice strategy, which goes to Cabinet on the 2nd of May. We have been looking at ways that we can address the inequalities as we move forward. We are very aware of that. There are big issues that need to be addressed. There are policies put in place in terms of how we're actually going to be doing that going forward. Affordability of housing is key in that strategy, as in terms of how we address child poverty, as in terms of how we use our community and partnership development team to work directly with communities. So there are processes in place. What the corporate plan also gives us is an opportunity to ensure that everything is feeding in together, so we're moving forward as one. Whereas I think in the past it may have been a little bit disparate. I think the fact that we're building our economic development strategy with our planning colleagues is a huge step forward for us. So we're moving in the right direction. There's still plenty of work to do, but I think we've certainly got the policy frameworks, or will have the policy frameworks in place to make those changes as we move forward.
Okay, Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the report that was commissioned by yourselves in December 2017, it says that the baseline was based on the Monmouthshire Digital Maturity Analysis 2016, the Baseline Economic Analysis South East Wales 2015. After the reports were done, we heard that there was the CCR deal and also the Severn Bridge tolls are coming down. So is the baseline data correct because of the information that came afterwards? And what is the impact on the report of that? And second question, you mentioned that the economy of Monmouthshire has slipped in the last 15 years in terms of growth when comparing with comparators. I'm just wondering if the comparators were rural or semi-rural counties like ourselves. Who are they? And what sort of metrics have you got on their development? Okay, thank you.
In terms of the baseline data that we've used, we've had what we've got currently at that moment. Clearly, as part of the Cardiff Capital Region programme of activities, a lot of work is being done in terms of insights, in terms of innovation opportunities. So what we're doing is making sure that we're building in line with that, and also a skills analysis has all been done. So everything that we're having, as we're having it, is as up to date as possible. We're passing that on. But we realised clearly that when we wrote the strategy in 2014, the world has changed dramatically since then, hence our reason, the reason why we wanted to do this. In terms of comparators, what we've asked them to do is not just look in Wales, but to look across our borders. So they're looking at Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, Worcestershire, because there are so many different new initiatives going on there. Herefordshire has a new university about to be opened soon. All the work that's going on in Gloucestershire as well. So, and towards the southwest, also looking in terms of Somerset, etc. So they're using those as comparators, because we feel we have to look sort of nationwide as opposed to sort of purely just within our principality, really.
Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Roden?
This is quite interesting to hear where the comparators are, and I'm quite pleased that we're using similar counties to our own. It's noticeable that you mentioned that Herefordshire is going to have a university, and maybe that's something for us to consider in this county as well, moving forward, because if we are talking about scientific and technical jobs, then surely that is the kind of infrastructure that we should be considering as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Chair. We talk a bit about the young people going off to university or returning, and that pathway being one of the things that we focus on. But what are we doing in the plan to do with the sort of other pathway where we've got a skills shortage in the trades of, we're poised for a lot of construction in the county, and if they build the new power station on the other side of the water, then that would be 5,000 jobs in the region Certainly it might be easier coming from our side than from their side. I mean, how do we, in our plan, work in that sort of skills gap and that avenue for young people?
Specifically in terms of skills, particularly in construction, clearly we have Apprentice, which the authority jointly owns with Mellon Homes. We're very much working with our colleagues in the Cardiff Capital region as well in terms of construction projects that are coming forward. We're developing a pipeline not only of young people but also in terms of companies and opportunities and aligning skills and opportunities accordingly. I do feel there's still a fair bit of work to do in terms of the profile of apprenticeships, that it needs to be raised, that there are more opportunities for people to actually understand that they can earn while they learn. But it's very much making sure that we're keeping on top of things and actually where we can ahead of the game. We're putting forward opportunities in terms of community benefits and those kind of things to make sure that apprentice is written into construction contracts as they're going out, to make sure that we're providing as many opportunities as possible. But clearly construction is only one element. In terms of the skills themselves, there is a programme going forward as part of the capital region which we are involved in and informing in terms of how we look at the links between school right the way through to sort of opportunities. So there are things in progress. There's still an awful lot of work to be done. I do think, though, that there are more opportunities now to work more directly with Welsh Government, and they are more open in terms of those opportunities too. So it's just making sure we keep pushing it and keep pushing it. STEM is clearly a big thing that we need to be pushing as well in terms of science and technology. So we just need to keep pushing things forward as much as we can. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It would be nice to see the apprenticeships gain a bit more parity with the university pathway, simply because a lot of people who go through that route will actually find themselves earning a lot more than their peers in a very short space of time, and I don't think that's necessarily, out there as a piece of information. Also, just it says about a modest rise in employment in the county would only produce a modest rise in productivity, and we've talked in this committee before about productivity. And how I'd be interested to know how is that the productivity, as I think of it, in old money. It's the bottom line. It's the money in, money out productivity, not the idea that the well-being and quality of life that we have in Monmouthshire is a measure of our productivity. Now, if you count that in, you could argue that even with a small amount of employment, as long as we get our infrastructure right, we would actually have a great increase in productivity rather than a modest one. I mean, is it the old money productivity that we're talking about there?
I'd say we were looking at, I was supposed to say we're looking at both, but we actually are. What we've asked the consultants to do at the workshop is actually to provide, say, 3 different scenarios. So if we were to, say, an increase of 1,200 jobs, this is what it could look like. If we took a middle ground, this is what potentially could. If we go for gold, then this is the impact that we'd be looking at, and these are the options. So what we decided we wanted to do as officers was to give those options to you, because we, as a committee, you've been very keen in terms of how we look at marketing and how we look at inward investment. So it's very, very important that we have your views, because that will help us push this forward in terms of, sort of how we move forward with the strategy once we've got it in place. So that's what we've asked them to do, is to provide those 3 different scenarios. But if we want to do this, these are the different changes we're going to need to make. So that's what we'll be discussing on the 11th of May.
Okay. Are you happy, satisfied with that? Yeah, Councillor Devi?
Thank you, Chair. We're in an area where I'm particularly interested in at the moment, being a governor of Chepstow School, and the school really is at the face of 2 different cultures in terms of education. The curriculum being offered in Chepstow now, with the Welsh curriculum, is beginning to show signs of it not being acceptable to a wider range of people, and that's being shown because of the numbers that are going up in YDing. You only have to see the children walking across to that school and realise the numbers that there are in Chepstow School. So the question I really want to pose is, if we are talking about preparing our children for the job opportunities, and we've all talked about them here, which we can see coming, is our particular curriculum, and this is going to be a bit difficult, but I'll go with it anyway. Is our particular curriculum being offered in Monmouthshire, because Monmouthshire is the bulwark of all these changes, if you like, in the southern part of the county? Is it particularly fit for purpose for the industries that we hope will come here, but also for the new people that are moving in from here, that come from a different culture and have been used to a different education system, which has a distinctly different offer, if you want. People coming from the wider Bristol area across here and bringing their families across here come from an engineering background that goes back through the aircraft industry, back through Brunel. It goes back centuries. And if they are moving here, they are going to have an impact, whether we like it or not. They are going to come here, and they will bring their money and their children with them, and they will want change. Now, I think we talk around it an awful lot, but the issue here of preparing our children, well, our children are going to be slightly different in future, because they will be new families, new children, and coming with different expectations. And I really am concerned that perhaps we are not looking at that. I've spoken to different people about Chepstow School and whether, because we've got a delay going to the 21st century schools, whether that doesn't offer us an opportunity to revisit the curriculum and the needs for our particular catchment area. I know this is on the edge of what is what we're talking about, but it really is important as far as this county going forward is concerned, and what we need to do to prepare our children for the needs of industry when it comes here, and the needs of the new public when it comes here. And that is an issue that I don't, maybe I've got it wrong, but I don't hear anybody talking about that, and I'm concerned about it.
Thank you, Councillor Devi, and I think the issue about, okay, thank you, Councillor Harris. I think the issue about choice on the board is a challenge, and I'm not going to be here to defend the Welsh Government's position on its development of the new curriculum, but I'm sure it will say, well, it's not necessarily about the subjects, it's about the approaches and the skills the pupil is going to learn about, how they're going to develop further and how they're going to approach any subject, and the matter of understanding and learning and grasping those skills from an early age. But I don't know whether officers want to respond. Do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I would say it's slightly outside our remit, but I'm not sure it is really. What we really wanted this strategy to do was to identify the growth sectors and the skill sets that were required. Once we've got that data, we have the evidence then to move forward and inform our colleagues in education. These are what's going to be needed. I also think there is somewhat of a disconnect between what businesses want and perhaps what education is providing at the moment. I think that's accepted, particularly in terms of the Regional Business Council and Cardiff Capital Region, the Economic Growth Council. All those, this is accepted. So there are plans in place to address this, but I think at a county level, this provides us with a really good opportunity to say, this is the evidence, this is what we need. Now, how can we work with you to ensure that we're providing that right curriculum? And we have a similar issue in terms of apprenticeships, whereby, we, for example, using a simple trade like dry lining, that is exactly what the construction industry wants. Can we find a college that delivers it? No. So, you know, and that is at a very simple level. These things need to be addressed to ensure that we're providing the right training for our apprentices so they can grow going forward and absolutely be in the right place. So I accept what you're saying, yeah. And we will use this document to inform that.
Sorry, Councillor Devlin, you could just put your microphone on. Thank you.
One point for anybody, and if they get the opportunity to go and see it, and I was invited to go and see it, and that is to go and look at the new Berkeley College, which is built on the part of the old power station. They've used part of the power station to develop a college up there. And if you go and see the way that they are preparing the young people up there for the widest range of STEM-based, science-based, mathematics-based, however you want to put it, preparing their children for the market, it is quite extraordinary, and it does show how other people, how other counties are seeking to grab the opportunities. That's all I'll say about it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chairman. Armand made a good case about the affordable housing, but I'd like to go to the other end of the scale. We're likely to get quite a lot of high-paid jobs in the area. Have we got the housing that would accommodate executives who are very highly paid? And perhaps Mark can answer this. Are the developers coming up with any proposals to build such housing in the area?
Chair, I'd suggest possibly not at the moment in terms of what you might imagine. I guess maybe it's some of my assumptions about what some of this executive housing looks like. Part of that possibly comes back to our current housing sites being the larger sites. So you will get some bigger houses on those estates, but possibly some of these people aren't looking to live on a larger housing estate. They're looking for something a bit more bespoke. I was going to say there's nothing to stop those happening. I suppose there is, in terms of the land that we've made available, the nature of those sites being big ones, so directed to PLCs, and some of the range and choice. No doubt there'd also be a discussion or an argument in the future, because there's certainly one developer that likes doing those kind of developments on a fairly small scale. They insist on them being in a nice area. They insist on them being on a good school catchment. 2 boxes that we can easily tick in Monmouthshire. But they, generally speaking, want the affordable housing to be somewhere else, which would be contrary to our policies. We can have a discussion in the next LDP if that's something you did want to look at. I would prefer mixed and sustainable communities in principle. Maybe that doesn't always mean on exactly the same site. If there were 2 parcels of land in the same village or same area, I don't know. It's one for discussion. But I think that would probably be the challenge back from some of the developers. They'd quite like some 6-bed executive houses on a very low density, gates across the drive, and no one else coming in. Thank you very much. Yeah, ensuite everything, including kitchen. Yeah. So that's one of the balances that we need to make. But it is it's a query actually that another councillor, I won't name them in case they mind, but they might speak up in a minute, has mentioned that they'd heard that people in the town that they represent, I'm narrowing it down too much, sorry, Councillor Roden, they are saying about parents of children going to the schools. Would be interested in living in the county, but they don't feel at the moment they can find the right type of housing to meet their needs. So it is something we need to think about.
There any other questions at this stage? I've got one just on the back of the underperformance, really, or the perception of underperformance. what were those, or what have been the critical issues? Is it, has it been, obviously broadband infrastructure, and infrastructure has been a challenge, but what has been those significant barriers which have seen our economy underperform? Has there been any more analysis at this stage from the research?
The overview they gave us was that after the crash, we didn't come out as quick as others. It took longer. I'd say I think we have a strong economy in terms of it's very varied. But a lot of our businesses are quite small. So it's sustainable, it's resilient, but it's not growing as fast as it could. So, and I think we are constrained with some of our businesses who want to grow more, particularly we've got areas in Monmouth and Abergavenny where businesses want to grow, but they've outgrown the site and there's nowhere for them to grow on to. So it's really making sure that we're identifying this as part of the process, which I think is, the advantage of us working so closely as economic development with James and the business inquiries, and then with planning colleagues to say, well, actually where we need the land is there, not where it is at the moment. And we've done some desk exercises in terms of looking at Abergavenny and literally gone around a map and saying, well, where could we grow this? And we're limited. So, and we've been contacted by businesses and we actually can't help them. So, where businesses have actually gone out of county, they don't want to do that because their workforce is local. So it's just making sure that some of those things will factor in when we haven't grown as much as we could have done in the past. James, I don't know if you want to add any more into that.
Could I just add a little bit, Chair? I think Kath said pretty much everything I was thinking as she went. Some of the data that we picked up on, they actually said that Monmouthshire entered the recession slightly before others, which is possibly slightly because we had smaller companies who are maybe more vulnerable, and also partly because we've got older demography. So one of the first things companies tend to do is offer people early retirement or redundancy. So if people were at that end of their career, perhaps more interested in going. So two of the bits of work, we touched on the one earlier about looking at what are the growth sectors, how do we provide for them in the future. We've also looked at our current LDP sites to start questioning why perhaps haven't they come forward. Are they for the right things in the right places? Are they actually available? We've got one site that's in an amazing place, but there's about 5 different landowners. So it's not going to come forward easily. So are there different ways we can tackle that, or is that site just not going anywhere? And also one of the bits of work we want to do is not just look at the growth sectors, but as Kath mentioned, we've got some great businesses in the county. So speak to them and say, what are their aspirations for the next 10, 15 years? Do they want more land? Do they need to relocate completely? They just want to extend, and how can we accommodate that? But the point I was going to make is one that Kath touched on or covered, was we did a bit of just 4 of us in a room looking at a map of Abergavenny, thinking we've got these businesses, where might they go? It's incredibly constrained. Between the floodplain and the national park and the Hereford bypass type road, there isn't a vast amount of opportunity. So I think just in a wider context, if we are going to tackle some of this, we'll have to make some quite brave decisions in the future. And it's back to the point that Councillor Blakeburn made first off about what makes the county special. Only 3% of our county is built on at the moment, but we do have almost a tendency to think that every field is sacred. So we need to try and balance. I'm not saying build on a huge percentage of it by any means, but we need to try and get that balance right. In my opinion, it's up to members really when we look at the options. If the preferred option is keep the fields and live as we are, that's your call. It's not my personal preference, but that is an option, and that is something that will come before you.
Jake, can I ask you mentioned that only 3% of the county is built on. Of that 3%, what percentage is that in the south?
I don't know, I'm afraid, Chair. I can share the link that I got that information from. It was something that was it's actually via the BBC, some evidence that had been gathered. You just type in your county and it gives you the stats. It's really quite interesting. But it doesn't break it down beyond administrative boundaries. So I don't know if that data is available behind the scenes. We can try and find out. But a good chunk of it's in the south, just from local knowledge and assumptions.
So you got this information from National Statistics Office, then, did you? Or
I can't remember the exact source, but I have got it. It was actually a bit of a link, but perhaps not overly obvious in the council report for the LDP. But I can easily find it and email it round straight after this meeting.
Okay, are there any other questions at this stage? No. So just to briefly sum up then, obviously getting the right balance for development is really important, and that's a integral part of the LDP process, which Mark and the team are taking forward. But as you can see from the synergy this morning between planning and economic development, the regeneration, how the offices are working really closely together, I think it shows that I think our approach this time is going to be very, very good. We've obviously looked at some of the challenges and some of the barriers to economic development. Broadband infrastructure is a significant barrier, and that's something that this committee is going to look at on the 19th of July. We're going to get Welsh Government back into us then. Affordability and affordable housing is an issue, but also as Councillor Strong has raised, there's challenges on both ends of the housing spectrum that need to be addressed. In terms of understanding some of the baseline data, I think Councillor Roden picked up on some of that and challenged some of that, and Councillor Breakbuff sort of followed up with about looking at profiling of people and why residents and businesses are moving to Monmouthshire. What is the attraction, what is the draw, and we probably need to do a little bit more in terms of survey work with residents. I know Mark suggested that some of the work around well-being and quality of life has been done, but that is very separate to what are the economic draws and what do people want for the future for themselves and their family. We touched on looking at potential new settlement, and obviously that's something that's going to be in part of the LDP plan review, and potentially developing new models, looking at smaller parcels and developing with opportunities and partnerships with smaller developers. Social mobility we've sort of touched on, and that's going to be really important there, as Councillor Watts has rightly pointed out. There are some great inequalities in some of our communities that need to be addressed, and I know the social justice policy will be underpinning some of that work. Skills and alignment, some more work needs to be done there, and particularly in how we develop our curriculum moving forward, and that's obviously providing some of the evidence base to Welsh Government as well, because it's obviously a Welsh-wide curriculum. In terms of recommendations then, it's about for us to provide feedback which will shape the members' workshop. I know colleagues have been really enthused to get involved in some of the detail on this and to help officers shape the strategy going forward. I had a discussion with James and Hazel about the sort of order of workshops. James, do you want to say why we sort of chose the particular chronology of the workshops? And it's only a suggestion at this stage. Members may want to take a different view, but I think to understand the reasoning behind that would be helpful. So if you could do that, James, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. Clearly, the work that's going on at the moment provides a lot of useful evidence that will guide, as Kath has mentioned, our future strategy, and will, I think, provide some useful information in terms of how we move forward in terms of inward investment as well, and the types of business that we look to target. So our suggestion and our discussions were along the lines of continuing this work and undertaking the workshop, and then looking at what's potentially happening in neighbouring authorities and opportunities for sharing experience and maybe potentially even ways of working together or opportunities for working together, and then moving on to looking at those sectors that we're looking to target in terms of inward investment and how we reach those, and the messages that we communicate to them with a view to attracting them to the area and promoting the area.
Okay, so what we've suggested is on the 11th of May we look to have, on the morning of the 11th of May, we have the Economies of Future workshop, and then we look at the further detail, the interim findings, and officers will bring the three options to us in terms of how ambitious we want this strategy to be. In the afternoon then of the 11th of May, the second part is to have Gloucestershire First come in, and we do some work with them in terms of where are the challenges and opportunities for us and for Gloucestershire, with both in terms of economic development, infrastructure, and housing. And then on the 15th of May, I apologize, these are quite close together, we carry on with the next phase, the procurement workshop, which we've already started. Colleagues, broadly happy? You don't have to stay at this stage, but because we're going to look at it on the forward work programme further down the agenda. But are you broadly happy with that sort of chronology? Sorry, Hazel, do you want to say something?
Sorry, Chair, I've given you the wrong information. Basically, we are proposing the first workshop on the economies of the future on the 11th of May. We'll send out an invite with the timing to you. The economies of the future, the second workshop in which we intend to invite Gloucestershire First, that's going to be a separate workshop, so a different date. The procurement workshop, we're on number 3 now, that's on the 15th of May. That's a separate, distinct work stream from these two that we've talked about there. And then the proposal was then to do the marketing Monmouthshire for Business workshop sort of at the end, as James has sort of suggested, a logical order. Okay.
Councillor Becker?
So we don't have a date in mind for the marketing element. That's not being tagged into something else. We're just moving that along the line.
Okay, colleagues happy at this stage? Yeah. Okay, can I thank officers then for your presentation and for providing responses to questions. As I alluded to earlier, I think the fact that you're working across departments and so closely is really positive, and I think it bodes well for the structure of developing our strategy moving forward. So thank you all very much. Sorry, can you put your microphone on?
I know later on we're going to look at the work programme, but we've got in June to invite Welsh Government back to the committee to discuss the superfast rollout. Have we invited them, and are they going to come?
It's going to be the 19th of July.
Oh, it's moved up. Yeah. Fine. July. But have they said yes? They're coming. Ah, right.
We expect them to come. Okay, I think we're just going to set up the system for the next presentation.
Yeah, I want to start with this.
Yeah.
I was in this presentation before I would like to do it, but this will be fun.
Ta-da! That's it. You went to touch your keyboard, didn't you? You went to sit down.
Kelly, sorry, can you just touch that microphone off there, please? Thank you. Okay, we're going to move back then to agenda item 5, which is presentation on the City Deal progress update. Colleagues will be aware from the last council that the interim business plan now has been signed off by all 10 authorities, which is great. Although I think we had it was a question for myself regarding potential local government reorganisation and whether or not that's going to throw a hand grenade in, but we'll park that to one side at the minute, and obviously welcome the Chief Officer for Enterprise, Kelly Byrne, and who is the now new Director Designate of the Capital City Region Programme. So Kelly's going to provide us with a shortish presentation and allow us to ask some questions on the back of that. So thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't seen the presentation that I'm going to deliver this morning. It's not one of mine. It's an IQE one. So bear with me if this affects my fluency. But I think it stems from the fact that members have asked for some time now to understand a little bit more about the project that Monmouthshire has led and run on behalf of the Cardiff Capital Region, which is around the compound semiconductor foundry and cluster in Newport. So I'll take us through some of the background on that, where we are, and some of the future opportunities that present, because I think it's really important to remember that Monmouthshire is leading this process, but it is also 1/10 of an owner of a company, CSC Foundry Limited, that operates right across the Cardiff Capital Region and tries to bring together the supply chain around compound semiconductors, which is a key industry of the future and could be very, very important to us realising competitive advantage for our region and important to our county as well, which I'll talk about in a few minutes' time. But just to recap in terms of where we are with the Cardiff Capital Region City deal. So you all know our deal is worth about 1.3 billion. So it's a devolution deal, and it's a bit different for us in the Cardiff Capital Region because as well as central government being the sponsors of our deal, we've got the Welsh Government layer in as well. So there's a sense of double devolution, if you like. So it's quite significant financially. It's the biggest financial deal agreed in the UK to date. But 1.3 billion is nothing, really. I mean, that's not going to move the needle in the way that our economy really needs, because we are a lagging economy. But what we've got to do with that 1.28 billion, which isn't a grant, it's an investment, we've got to use it as the purchase to go out into the world and bring in bigger levels of investment that help projects, initiatives and new industries fly. So our target is to bring in about 4 billion over the life of the city deal, which I think is low. You know, when you consider that the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund is about 5 billion a year with additional for R&D and sector deals on top, you know, I think we're pegging that low. I think there's much more potential than that. And we've got to create 25,000 jobs. And we've got to create a GVA bounce of upward of about 5%. Now, I just want to pick up on the point that Councillor Becker made, because I think sometimes these statistics, sometimes this stuff around productivity is a bit misleading, because I think that we could have 25,000 jobs in the region really easily by opening up rubbish call centres everywhere, where there's really low-skilled, low-paid staff. You'd hit your target, but you'd completely miss the point. Or for example, we could get 5% GVA growth by unemployment going up overnight or by making the wealthy companies wealthier. So to go back to your question, Councillor Becker, is this productivity as we know it, or is it a new definition of productivity? It has to be a new definition of productivity. I think what we're trying to do with the Cardiff Capital Region City deal is increase prosperity. That's very different to productivity. Productivity is part of it, but it's not the whole answer. We want people to have more money in their pockets, but so they can give themselves and their families better lives. And if themselves and their families have better lives, communities will become more resilient and they'll be less reliant on public services. So that is very much our definition of productivity. It's tightly bound with prosperity, and I think that's really important for the social justice angle that we bring to our city deal. As the chairman just said, we've agreed the joint working agreement business plan, so all 10 local authorities are now signed up to the principles, some of the ways of working, and indeed some of the initial projects and themes that will take forward the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal. And lucky for us in Monmouthshire, we're behind the innovation and the digital theme. And even though that's a theme, you know, it's not linear, it cuts right across the deal. So innovation is central to how we think about skills, transport, connectivity, infrastructure, housing of the future. Innovation is a mindset. So I think that the fact that Monmouthshire is leading that in the city deal is opportune, because it enables us to cross-cut so many different areas. What agreeing the JWA business plan actually does is release the £120 million borrowing that the local authorities are committed to. So beyond the HM Treasury monies that we've already committed to the compound semiconductor project, we've now got funds, we've now got opportunities to start bringing in additional money and projects and to actually start getting some things off the ground. So we've got a number of frameworks that have been agreed to date. One project is already agreed, compound semiconductors, which I'm going to talk to you about now. Another one in the pipeline is the Metro Central project in Cardiff, which is around their bus station, but it's about making that a regional transport hub that actually powers up the Valley Lines and the connections, not just that way, but sort of horizontally across the region. And there are 3 other frameworks that have been agreed. One is around skills, which, as Kath has mentioned, is critical. You know, that's going to be critical not just to our economic success, but to the way that we make social progress across the region. Probably the hardest one to crack, I think, but, you know, not any less important for that. The next one is around digital. So a digital prospectus for the region, with some projects already underway, with some currency to these projects. So Monmouthshire with Newport and Cardiff have already received local full fibre network approval. So enhanced connectivity come into our area, working with Newport and Cardiff. We've also secured the 5G test bed, or the 5G accelerator, which is just Monmouthshire, but we'll be working in conjunction with Yorkshire and Humberside on that. And I think it's official now. Kath, I'm going to say it anyway, but we're not, well, I'm going to say it anyway, but we think we've secured one of the only councils in Wales to bring industrial strategy monies in through the GovTech Challenge Fund. So linked to the work we're doing on procurement, some experimentation to find a better solution to problems around rural transport, loneliness and isolation. We have to be a bit tentative because we haven't had final approvals. You know, we think we're down to the last 2. We think it's good news, but we have to wait for ministerial sign-off. So there are some caveats with that, but I remain hopeful. So that's where we are in terms of the bigger picture. But what I wanted to talk to you today about was the IQE compound semiconductor project, because I know it's attracting quite a lot of attention. IQE reported a very successful year-end at the end of March this year, which saw 100% growth in some of their key market segments, one of which we're the principal investors in. So it's quite important, I think, to share some of that information, because as I said at the outset, we are part owners of a company that leases the building, facilities and clean rooms to IQE PLC. So just to remind you what we did, going back to 2017, I was aware for a long time of the potential around the growth of compound semiconductors in our region. IQE are an indigenous Welsh company. They were spawned out of WDA back in the 80s, founded by Dr. Drew Nelson, who is, you know, a force of nature, you know, exactly somebody you need to sort of take forward a big growth segment. And IQE had an amazing growth opportunity. They had a huge contract with an OEM based in North America. I can't say the name, but most of us have their phones. So it's a really well-known end manufacturer. And the potential was really for City Deal to make a small investment in order for IQE to expand into this new growth segment, to take up this contract. And the reason that IQE couldn't put forward that finance themselves was because of their investment profile and because of their investor profile. And essentially, they needed to keep any new investment off balance sheet. It was really important in terms of the structure of their company and their growth trajectory. So what we were able to do, and it was a project that Peter and myself worked on with support from the chief executives and overall support from the regional cabinet, was to ensure that we, as the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal, were in a position to make a £40 million investment into the project, not the company, into the project. And we did that by buy-in from Welsh Government, as you'll recall. We brought the report forward to members. Buy-in the old LG building in Newport, down at Celtic Horizons. So a 400,000 square foot building. It's a beast of a building. And essentially what we've enabled is that building to be completely regenerated and to install a series of clean rooms into those buildings. The clean room environments into which IQE can install reactor tools, about 100 reactor tools, which are about £3 million a throw. And on those reactor tools then, they will develop advanced compound semiconductors, which are essentially the wafers that go into the chips that are the components needed for the next generation handset for this particular end manufacturer. The difficulty for us was we only had 3 months to do the project because of contractual obligations and commercial imperatives. If IQE couldn't secure the facility in our region, they were off to the US, where the government there incentivises. They've already got operations. They've got 3 different operations on the east coast of America, and their plan was to expand those and to take that production away from our region, lose that jobs and growth potential. So it was something that we had to do, and it was very difficult because, as you can imagine, there were all kinds of obstacles and tensions. But, you know, we got there in the end. We secured the deal. So we're £40 million into the building and clean room infrastructure. IQE are investing £375 million into that building in terms of kitting it out and putting the reactor tools into it. So our leverage, going back to my point about 4 billion at the start, we've already levered in 375 million through this project alone. And independent due diligence and economic impact assessments shows that that foundry itself will create probably nearly 1,000 jobs by the time it's built out. But it will stimulate, in terms of the wider supply chain and spatial concentration of companies that are starting to come to the area, between about 5,000 and 6,000 really high value jobs in what I've already described as a key growth segment. So for us in the region, you know, where the average salary is about £24,000-25,000, to bring in jobs with an entry level of about £45,000 is significant. It could be a game changer if we get it right. So I'm just going to give you a bit more background information then in terms of compound semiconductors, because of the profound impact they're having on the world. And you've probably all heard of Moore's Law. So, you know, Moore's Law sort of 50 years ago was predicting that the electronic components that we have in digital devices, their potential would roughly double, you know, over defined periods of time. Now, with silicon, that was true. So silicon wafers powered the digital revolution as we know it, the early telecoms revolution. But actually, silicon has probably come to its limit in terms of the capabilities that it has. It can only be cooled at certain temperatures. It doesn't have the pliability. And you can't enact the miniaturization process that you need with just silicon. So Moore's Law was found to be wanting in terms of the future of silicon. And I think, you know, commentators today think that Moore's Law is probably way off, because what we're seeing in terms of capability around electronics and digital devices is exponential growth. You know, if you think of the rate of growth over the past 10 years alone, you know, the possibilities are just huge, aren't they? And ever increasing and ever optimizing. So compound semiconductors have different properties to silicon. So that you're able to enact that miniaturization process, which gets these wafers as, you know, as thin as your fingernail, and they're much more efficient, they're much more optimal than traditional silicon. And what we're seeing is that the need for these compound semiconductors to basically charge up and fuel everything from wireless to solar panels to engines to automotives of the future. Everything around us essentially uses a compound semiconductor. So it's a really important enabling technology, not just for industry, but in terms of the way in which we tackle some big societal challenges. So things like 3D sensing will be really important in a few years' time because they'll be able to test our blood levels for all manner of things. So some of this comes back to dementia and diabetes and all of the big health problems that we're trying to address as a society as well. Okay, so it translates into a huge market opportunity in those growth segments that I've put up there on the screen. So everything from the Internet of Things to energy efficiency, defense, aerospace, cybersecurity, healthcare, artificial intelligence. The underpinning enabling technology is compound semiconductors, and we're fortunate in that way to have IQE here on our doorstep in the region. So the real advantage, I think, the real competitive advantage is around how we use compound semiconductors in that wider supply chain, how it powers up that much wider supply chain in all of those segments that I've spoken about this morning. Things like, the rollout of sort of future broadband, future products, a lot of BT services, in fact, are built upon modern compound semiconductors. And I think what used to happen in the past, before we enacted this project, was that IQE would produce the wafers. The wafers would go off to North America and to China. They would be commercialised into chips. So basically, we'd get the low-value product in the UK, and the high-value commercialisation and productisation of those wafers would go to the Far East and North America. So we were getting jobs and we were getting growth, but it was pretty much low-value stuff. So the benefit of this is to really anchor the high-value work in our region. So part of the opportunity for us working as the Cardiff Capital Region then was to understand how all of the different pieces were coming together at a really opportune point in time. Now, the reason we were so encouraged and confident to make that final investment was because of the alignment of lots of different factors. So there was already a load of investment going on in terms of compound semiconductors. So IQE had already engaged with Cardiff University in an institute for advanced compound semiconductors. So making sure that we've got the growth, the skills, the training in terms of the research and development, the lower value stuff, but the foundational stuff, if you like. So technology readiness levels, the TRL there is 1 to 3. That's the lower end of the value chain. Still important because you've got a growth on it, but the lower end. And IQE as well then worked with Cardiff University and Welsh Government and other supply chain manufacturers to form the Compound Semiconductor Centre, which again is based in Cardiff, part at St Mellons, part at Cardiff University. And they brought across a very significant professor, Diana Huffaker from UCLA, who is a world-renowned expert in compound semiconductors. She's now in Cardiff, and she's sort of part of leading this charge forward. So that takes us into the prototyping space, making sure that we've got product that could be potentially used. And what we've got with IQE, with companies like Infineon, with companies like Newport Wafer Fab, with companies like Microsemi, which is based in Caldecott, is the ability to productize what comes out of those lower TRL processes. So the money, the value, is in relation to that higher technology readiness level around production. And then things like the Catapult Centre, which I'll talk about in a few minutes' time, and the investment we've made obviously tries to sort of complete that bigger picture. Okay, so one of the things that I think really attracted the regional cabinet to the investment proposition that we put forward was the fact that in our region we do have this collection of companies. Lots of them sort of straddle all 10 local authorities. Some of them are global, significant anchor companies for us here in the region, but they're all part of that wider supply chain. So for every local authority, it felt like there was something in it for them. They could see the potential benefits of this, which was really quite critical. Okay. So that slide there just sort of outlines the investment profile for the foundry and some of the wider capability there in terms of job creation, in terms of payroll contribution and GVA impact, the wider investment that we now have the potential to bring in through things like research and development, ERSC funds, Innovate UK, Industrial Strategy Challenge funds, and the R&D, which is going to be really significant for our region. Because when you look at the region and when you look at Monmouthshire as well, the businesses that we're seeing growth in are the research and development intensive businesses. So that it's really important that we bring all of those factors together. Okay. So that's the building, and I was just talking to Councillor Greenland at the back, because Councillor Greenland chairs CSC Foundry Limited. He's the lead director, and it would be really good, I think, to take this committee down to see what is going on in that foundry, because I went there this week, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. Now, when I say it's nearly 400,000 square foot, that's really hard to imagine. This space is vast. And the great thing is that 10 clean rooms have gone in already into that building. And I was really thrilled because the first reactor is in and it's actually churning out product already. You know, to see that coming down after such a long time and such a difficult process is quite incredible to see. So it would be good to sort of take members into that environment so you can sort of experience what is going on and you can hear from IQE as to some of the possibilities and future opportunities. Now, one of the things that I hope to be taking forward in my new role is not just the foundry, because, you know, we're landlords of a factory, you know, for want of a better way of describing it, but the real potential comes, I think, in aligning some of the other supply chain companies around that significant asset that we own there in Newport. So around the building, there's quite a lot of land. There's quite a lot of surplus land. Lots of companies have been in contact from North America, Canada, Indigenous UK companies, Middle Eastern companies. They all need to be part of the IQE supply chain. So they're looking at quite significant relocations, potentially to this area. And why I think the study that you had on first was so important this morning, the identification of sites, investor readiness packages, a prospectus for inward investment to make it easy, could be really important to securing one of these significant supply chain companies. So what we're doing with this building, and I think what we hope to do, subject to approvals, is to ensure that the front of the building doesn't have an IQE presence. IQE are in the building, it's their building, they rent it from us, but the front we want to, I suppose, be a feature in terms of attracting companies to the cluster. We've got the Catapult Centre, which is another significant investment by UK government, a £50 million investment in a centre there. They're going to be operating soon. I've seen the heads of terms because they're taking a sublease from IQE. They're going to be co-located in the building. And I think if we can use, you know, that different presence, the different profile, have some branding across the front door, we can start to pull in potential other partners and collaborators into what could be quite a significant cluster. And it's the cluster that will create the thousands of jobs. As I say, the factory on its own is probably only about 1,000 jobs. We probably secured another 550 by keeping Newport Wafer Fab open because that was due for closure. But it is the cluster that will bring about some of the big numbers. So that's hopefully what it will look like. And that just gives you an overview, really, of some of the potential on that site and wider. But, you know, I've described that building, the one that says Epifoundry Catapult, as being about 400,000 square foot. But you can see the one next to it, which is Next Generation Data Centre. You know, that's bigger again. So, you know, given, I think, the rates of adoption of IQE's product, I think very soon we could be looking for additional facilities bigger than some of the neighbouring properties down there, not just on that site, but across the region. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the cluster now, because I think that's probably the next job of work. So what we've been doing over the last 6 to 8 months with IQE and companies like Microsemi in Caldecott, companies like Airbus with Cardiff University, SPTS with the Economic and Social Research Council, is we've established a brand and incorporated it called CS Connected. So that will be the brand image that we put out there to the world in terms of our efforts and attempts to grow the cluster. And what that tries to do is to bring together all of the different partners that we need across business, across government, across entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurs are potentially significant partners in this, and higher education. So bringing all those key people together to think about how we create the conditions for industrial cluster growth. So that is underway, and as I say, you know, we really need to increase recognition of it. We need to get the right companies involved. We need to get government involved, because under the industrial strategy, manufacturing processes and materials of the future is one of the big growth areas the UK government wants to put a lot of money into as well. And to date, they've agreed 2 sector deals for the UK. The first sector deal has been for life sciences, and the second one has been for automotives. Now, compound semiconductors underpins both those industries, but what we really want to negotiate with central government is a single sector deal for compound semiconductors. And if we do, that will be really, really significant for our region. You know, we're talking about big sums of money here, but they will pale in significance to what I think we could potentially lever in. So yeah, so that just gives you an idea of the UK presence around compound semiconductors. And as you can see, this map doesn't really illustrate it very well, but the majority of the companies with the closest geographical proximity are all in the Cardiff capital region. So our partners in Europe and wider have identified us as Europe's 5th semiconductor cluster. Now, semiconductor clusters already exist in those European countries, in France and Germany, that I have up there. But the difference in the Cardiff capital region would be we would be the world's first advanced compound semiconductor cluster, so different to the silicon ones, and therefore we'd have comparative advantage in our own right. So some of the benefits that we have to achieve, so, you know, making this investment, these are some of the indicators that we have to fulfill working with IQE and the supply chain. And just look at that sort of 5th bullet point down about the potential for high value job creation. Because the salary levels are so significant with these jobs coming out of this sector, you know, they're worth more than just the average job. So if we do secure 5,000 high value jobs, that's equivalent to 20,000 normal or average salary jobs. So you can start to see the potential significance of this sector. So I hope that's given you a very quick whistle-stop tour. As I say, it's a really important technology. IQE are thriving as a company. They reported their year-end profits at the end of March of this year. And again, they're seeing 100% growth levels in the wafers that we're producing in our foundry. There's been some significant reports as well in the last couple of months, one by Morgan Stanley, one by Credit Suisse. And what they're saying is, because mass market adoption beyond the company that I mentioned to you earlier on, because that is now taking place, the growth rates could be exponential. And we're already talking to IQE about potentially securing more facilities around the region. Because if they do get the rate of mass market adoption that we think is probable, not possible, probable, then they're going to have to move at a rate of knots. And that presents us in the region and the UK with a significant opportunity. So going back to some of the questions around skills, you know, I think it's really important that we fill all ends of the skills segment. So the universities can do stuff with postdocs, they can do stuff with master students, with undergrads. We have to get further education colleges involved in this because, you know, some of these jobs are not all high-end engineer, you know, sort of technical stuff. Some of them are still quite significant but can be done by people without degrees. And the bit that I feel really passionate about is, you know, taking some of the kids that I know that are friends with my brothers, who get technology but use it for illegal purposes at the moment. Bright, lovely, nice kids don't have any hope because they've never been shown it, but they get technology. And I think our ambitions in this have got to be to connect those kids who are destined for prison, and instead of filling prisons with them, we've got to fill our industries like this with them. So I think if we can crack all of that, we could have something potentially very significant on our hands here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Questions, Councillor Becker? Yep.
Thanks, Chair. Internally, I squeal with delight whenever I go over this project. I do like it. So much potential, isn't there? I have a few questions, which hopefully you might be well placed to answer now in your new elevated position. What have we done, or what are we doing in terms of creating a community for those workers, for those high-value jobs? You know, is anybody sort of pitching for where they're supposed to live and what we're going to provide to make it an attractive environment for those kind of people first off? So.
It's an excellent question, and I think hopefully what I'll bring to the City Deal now is, as I said at the beginning, rather than seeing everything in separate vertical themes, housing, communities, job creation, innovation, skills, I think it's more about the way these things cross-cut. So if we're going to be creating a hub there in Newport and on that M4 corridor, and a hub that extends right through the region because it links all of these companies up, then, you know, that's where our growth needs to be, around transport hubs and connectivity, around housing. We've got to sweat the opportunities that we have rather than saying, oh, we've done this project here now, let's move over there and do something else. You know, I don't think growth and agglomeration and the spillover effects will work if you sort of try and do something in every little place. You know, these things, I think we've got to try and maximise the opportunities. So as part of the new SDP process, working for a strategic development plan, you would expect to see things like strategic housing sites, the opportunities for place shaping, you know, building communities of the future to be around these growth centres.
So in essence, we could essentially work elements of that into our LDP review, possibly, if you know.
I mean, we could. I think from a selfish Monmouthshire perspective, we've got Microsemi here. They're a growth business. They do the end productisation. So, you know, they bring big wealth to our area. You know, if we wanted to pitch into this, we need things like sites. We need investor readiness packages. We need to understand our inward investment proposition. And I think if we could get all of that coming together very quickly, then we'd be really well placed to join all of those things up.
I do have a couple of more questions, but I'm conscious of hogging Kelly's time. If I just do a couple, and then you tell me when you've had your fill. I noticed on the plan diagram there's a little bit set aside for a cybersecurity academy. I'm very interested in that and the pathways through to using that. Do we have any further information on the sort of timescale of those kind of things? What we might be able to get as a county in terms of a Metro Academy near to the station? Also, there was alluded to in an early draft of the plan. There was a first client sort of strategy for startups who would be encouraged to approach local authorities, and local authorities would be their first client, especially if the technology they were developing was to increase efficiency within those local authorities. So that sort of all went very quiet, and admittedly it was a kind of the content goes here gap in the plan. So do we have any more information on that kind of strategy and on the Cybersecurity Academy?
Yeah, what we can share with you is something Kath and I have put together. It's called the Innovation Prospectus for the Cardiff Capital Region, which has been endorsed by the Regional Cabinet. And what that contains is things like the commitment to the Cyber Academy. It contains the next project, which Kath and I are working on at the moment, which is a technology venture capital fund, because one of the issues that we've got in the region is we don't have risk capital. So we've got to have this notion of patient continuity finance, because otherwise we start up businesses really well, but we don't scale them up and support them through quite risky periods, really, which is something that we need to do. It contains proposals for a public services test bed. So that means throwing our challenges out as a public service. How do we solve dementia, diabetes, procurement, public transport, and that will create and stimulate, new businesses and new industries. It's not just about industrial problems. Big societal problems will charge the economies of the future. So we can share that with you. We've made a commitment to getting that back in to the regional cabinet. So those 3 projects can be approved. They'll have to be subject to approval. We don't know if they're going to be approved yet. We've got a lot of evidence underpinning them. And I think if we do, what we've got to try and do is take them forward as one. Because, for example, if we've got a public services test bed that's churning out a new company that can help us solve diabetes, for example, they're going to need access to things like risk capital. Then once they've started up and they've got their capital, they're going to need a space. They're going to need support. They're going to need to know what skills they can access in the local population. So I think it goes back to your first point about how we bring these things together and stop seeing them as isolated, disparate projects. We'll only get the real value when we look at them that way across.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very useful to see that before our procurement workshop, obviously, because if there's something where the testbed dovetails with that, would be very good. Do you have any, it's an interesting sort of situation of competition and cooperation, but do you have any interaction with the Bristol Region City Deal?
Yeah, there's been a bit of interaction. Probably there should be more, I think. I think we should be looking that way pretty quickly. I don't know if members have seen it, but the UK Innovation Survey was published about 4 days ago. And really positive news for us. England is the key region in terms of innovation growth businesses, but Wales is the second highest region in terms of innovation active businesses, even though we've lost ground. But the region that's charging ahead, the sub-region, is the South West. They're seeing unprecedented growth in innovation companies. And one of the proposals that we put forward was about extending the arc of innovation that comes up through the southwest of England down through the Cardiff capital region, because unfortunately when it crosses the Severn Bridge at the moment, it stops. So I think, engaging much more with Bristol and the southwest, probably through to Cambridge, is going to be really important for us. We can't just look one way with this city deal. We've got to look up, colleagues in Paris and Mid Wales and North Wales, and we've got to look across. But probably importantly as well, we've got to look internationally. We've got to stop thinking that, everything we're going to find that's good and we can embrace is in Wales, because it's not. It's probably not in the UK either. So the things I'm really looking forward to about this is the potential to establish an international profile. And going back to your point about startups, I got in contact with MIT yesterday about their Startup Accelerator programme. That's the stuff we should be sending businesses across to, not just thinking we can do an all right job here in Wales. Let's go to the best and take our companies to the best. And that's the kind of thing that I'm looking forward to sort of getting my teeth stuck into, really.
That's very encouraging, especially about extending out towards the sort of Oxbridge areas where there's a lot of research going on in technologies that we would want to see alongside this. Now, compound semiconductors and advanced compound semiconductors, brilliant. Are we doing much to reach out to associated nascent industries, such as, I'll read the word because I always get it wrong, perovskite photovoltaics? It's a mineral that they make new generations of photovoltaics out, but it dovetails with semiconductors. Are we reaching out to further academic areas to try and pull them in?
They are. Their second highest growth segment as a company is infrared and photonics. So they're already establishing, I think, their own IP and their own sort of functionality. I don't know if it's the same, but according to some of the estimates and the commentary I've seen through those reports, photonics is going to be big for the UK. It will underpin energy resilience and security globally. And I think with things like climate change, those industries are going to grow, aren't they? So IQE, again, their products sort of underpin all of that. I think sometimes the difficulty with this is it is so ubiquitous. Sometimes it's knowing where to start. Is it infrared photonics? Is it VCSEL wafers? Is it automotive? It's hard to know. But, I think we've got to relax a bit and see what comes to us as well, because the approaches are being made all of the time. And, some of them are absolutely fascinating. But we need the experts to know how we can back the winners, I think.
Yeah, that's good. It would be nice to see it reach out in that direction and have those similar kind of Cardiff University relationships, but with some of the research that's going on in those fields over in those areas. You said about energy security. How much of the compound semiconductor industry is reliant on rare earth materials and, you know, at risk from the sort of fluctuations in the supply and control of those?
I'm going to sound like a right geek now, but I just happen to know a little bit about, and Councillor Rowan will tell me. So some of they draw on materials and resources right across the periodic table. So gallium nitrate is one of the sort of the key components that they use. But I think it's arsine and phosphine in the main. And I think what they've got the competency to do at IQE, and I'm really glad, because otherwise this puts us in kind of nuclear power station territory from a health and safety perspective. They can self-generate. They've got the ability and the capability to self-generate on site there in Newport in the quantities that they need. So, I mean, when you look at the sort of chemical composition, the formula that goes into this, they bring together over 100 different components for every wafer. But the key ones that they need, that they could potentially fall foul of, given the state of global markets, they actually self-generate those things. So hydrogen is important. Gallium nitrate is really important for advanced compound semiconductors. But the phosphine and arsine, they can generate on site, which is good, because it doesn't mean we've got to store it. If we've got to store it, it's equivalent to sort of some oil tanker or, as I say, nuclear power station. So from that point of view, they're very resilient. That's where their IP and their expertise is.
Just good news on top of good news, really. All we need now is Elon Musk. So if you could just get him over, and I'll be happy. It'll be Nerdvana. I'll hand you over.
Thank you. Councillor Blakeburgh?
Thanks. This is all new area for me. I suppose one of the questions, and maybe Jess might be able to help me with the answer as well, is what's the life of the compound semiconductor industry? Because, you know, we're investing an awful lot in this, and obviously we never thought coal would run out and the steel industry would come to an end. So some idea on the life of the compound semiconductor industry. Also, I'm just interesting, Europe's 5th semiconductor cluster, and obviously we're working with all European countries. Is there any concerns over the Brexit deal, how that might have an impact on how we work together? So that's an interesting area for me. Bringing it back to Monmouthshire, so all these amazing opportunities. I mean, I'm quite excited by it as well, just to make sure that Monmouthshire residents do not miss out, or Monmouthshire young people do not miss out. Now, obviously, Kelly, you love us here, but your job is to look after the region and not just Monmouthshire. So it's how do we ensure that, that, for example, if there is a skill gap for this industry, how we address that skill gap so that residents here have got those skills in order to take up those high-level jobs, really, you know, which includes what we do in schools, retraining programs, internship, apprenticeships, those kind of things. Okay, hopping back to superfast rollout. So for me then, you're saying Monmouthshire is leading on the digital agenda and innovations for the city deal, leading on this. So is that not enough evidence or argument? Kath, are you there? She's gone. But really why we should be prioritised in the second phase rollout, because as we all know, we were last. In the first phase, we're behind. We're already behind the other authorities. We've asked, can we be in the first part of the second phase? And we've been told so far, probably not, actually. But this is evidence that we should really be, along with Newport in Cardiff, getting that superfast broadband. Otherwise, we're just going to lapse back again.
Yeah, I think they're really crucial points. I mean, to go back to your first about the lifespan of an advanced compound semiconductor, it's a bit like who knows. I mean, the due diligence we've had done says, you know, that this is the future, but how long is the future, I suppose, is the question. But the reason we've got such strong confidence in IQE is that, I mean, their pattern set is thousands. So they're developing new patterns, intellectual property advances all of the time. There is one potential competitor, but they're miles away from IQE yet. So we've got the highest levels of assurance from all the competition analysis we've done, from all the different countries that we've worked with. We've had experts in silicon and advanced compound semiconductors input into this process. And all I can tell you is that major volume customer, is committed to this project for the medium term to the long term. So the contract we have gives us sufficient confidence. So for our investment, we're in an 11-year lease with IQE. So we've got the evidence to suggest that this will be a growth segment beyond those 11 years. But by that time, they'll no doubt be into lots of other industries with lots of different products that, again, we may want to invest in. So we'll be okay, I'm pretty sure from that perspective. Brexit is an issue. It has affected things, and I know from talking to colleagues in IQE when they go out into the world, I think there is so much uncertainty and potential volatility. I think for skills, we're not going to be able to import some of the skills if there is a shortage. So it is going to create some problems and some tensions. We've had it in particularly with something called an IPSI, Important Projects of Common European Interest. Now, because IQE is such a significant technology for Europe and the world, the European Parliament were considering giving it an exemption or a partial exemption from state aid, because it's something that absolutely has to be developed. But now with Brexit, we're not quite sure what will happen with that. Our deal is state aid compliant as it stands, but if we want to do future deals with the company, we could have really benefited from this, because it could be a good thing for us to invest in and to make some money from as well. But with Brexit, it does throw considerable uncertainty on some of those levers and enablers that could have driven different benefit. So I think you're absolutely right to highlight it. And in terms of being sort of selfish about Monmouthshire, I think we do have an advantage because we've worked on projects like this. We understand the importance. We do have Indigenous companies like Microsemi. We've got fantastic sites. We've got the kind of areas that people want to live in. I think one of the deficiencies for me at the moment is around skills and is around how we embed this in terms of our curriculum thinking. And I read the other day that even if we could engage, I think it was 50% more women than we do currently in these kinds of industries, that would make such a significant contribution to the skills shortage. And when you look at the profile of girls who are getting involved in physics and maths and engineering, it's woeful when you look at the percentages and proportions. So, even if we could focus on just something like that, how do we get more girls into this? We would be making a significant contribution. So I think Monmouthshire, could do something like that, right? We're going to positively target this sector, and that's what we've got to offer you as the Cardiff Capital Region.
Okay, satisfied with that response? Yeah, okay.
The governance, are we dealing that later? Yeah.
Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. As I mentioned before to you, Kelly, I travelled to Shanghai, and I was massively impressed with the Chinese entrepreneurial spirit. And I'm quite staggered to see that it seems to be transplanted here at last. It's quite important that we take every advantage of this that we can. Entrepreneurs need pace. And you mentioned that we need to have some things like investment readiness packages in place. How are we going to get pace into everything that's required, site finding and all the rest? And is the Cardiff City deal part of that? Is that an enabler? Thank you.
I hope it will be. I think how we can get sort of pace into this, because I think as well, the Cardiff Capital Region is enabling this city deal. But, we're not the private sector. We're not going to be delivering on the city deal. We're not business. We're not entrepreneurs. So it's about how we galvanise that network and bring the right people together. So, one of the things that I've been thinking about is the need for data and insight and intelligence. We probably don't have those skill sets in the way that we need inside local government, but down the road, the Office of National Statistics do. So, how am I going to go about bringing them into this deal to support the regional cabinet and show how GVA is being impacted, how jobs are increasing. You know, the universities have got a huge role to play as well. Businesses, entrepreneurs, they've all got that insight. And I'm just trying to think about a way at the minute that we can bring all of that together and make the whole more than just the sum of the parts and partnerships and different boards and bodies, and think about how we power that up, because I don't think in government that we've got some of the skills and understanding. And certainly when you look at things like the industrial strategy, that 5 billion that's available there is only available to industry. Those projects have to be industry led. So unless we start working with the business sector in a different way, our leverage potential is going to be really constrained. And I don't think they want to come to committee meetings and sit around for hours and, you know, have some of the discussions that we're sometimes used to in government, which are important, but they'll see that as bureaucracy. So I think one of the big challenges that I'll face in the role and working with the regional cabinet is, you know, how do we find that middle ground? We still got to have process and governance, and it's still got to be right. But sometimes those things don't lend themselves to sort of pace and alacrity. So how do we find that different ground that assures both sides but allows us to move forward? Because even when we did this project, it took 4 months probably from end to end. That was too slow for IQE. They couldn't believe how slow we were. And I was trying to say, listen, for government, this is like shockingly fast. And they were like, oh, you're taking ages, all your solicitors, all your legal people, 4 sets of due diligence. So it's just finding that common ground, I think, which is going to be tough.
A second question, if I may. I think it's fantastic. It's going to have a major impact in the south of the county. I'm a bit concerned about the north of the county. Obviously, the county as a whole has been funding the Monmouthshire input. Just wondered how we can best gain advantage for the north of the county as well as the south. Thanks.
I mean, there's a lot going on under the banner of the city deal, from tourism to heritage to high street regeneration. And that's not to say that the north of the county should be just happy to have those, you know, those little bits, those lower value things. And I think, again, for me, it goes back to our intelligence. When we do look across the county, we do have significant businesses in the north that could be capable of expansion. We've got some isolated rural businesses as well that need to be nurtured. And I think it comes back to the message that I gave at my interview. I don't think this is all about the cities. I think this city deal's got to have something in it for everyone. And we're not short of money. There's loads of money out there, and we're not short of problems to solve. So I do think that in every space there has to be some big showcase projects and little ones. But I think the more we can improve our insight and our knowledge of business, what entrepreneurs need, what potential that we have, then the more that we can do. And we will not be confined by 1.28 billion, because in the grand scheme of things, you know, that's nothing, is it?
Okay, well, yep, Councillor Watts.
Yeah, in the city deal, there's not a lot. You know, we talked about this in full council. There's not a lot of discussion about. Well, there's not a lot of reference to really the seven-side economy. I know you've touched on looking outside of that, and that concerns me. So, for example, I'd be particularly interested in why Creo, which is a company in my ward that's just on the slip road there, that deal in very high-tech healthcare products that are advancing rapidly with licensing to the US and stuff, and it all looks very, very interesting as well, and are floated on the AIM market. What was the bait really to bring them into my ward, into Monmouthshire, when equally then they could have gone down, you know, the road of placed themselves in Avonmouth or something like that. Why that was. My other question is, what if, and it's the what ifs. I guess I'm concerned in light of kind of the news. There's been a lot of news about IQE, a lot of speculation. They were a heavily shorted company. Their share price was very, very volatile. What happens if things go wrong? Because IMG, which is in Jez's ward, they had a really strong setup there. The future was looking bright. Then suddenly it all went pear-shaped because guess what? Apple were prepared to breach the intellectual property. They knew they couldn't win the legal case, and now they've been bought out actually by the Chinese. So I guess what I'm concerned about is, how many eggs do we have? How many eggs are we putting into that basket in the event that something doesn't go quite right? You're saying it's pretty much future-proof, but this, the future is the future. We can't say for sure that the market doesn't change. What if things kind of go wrong there as well? That's my other question.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, just to address that first, we've got the relevant buyout clauses and everything built into the agreement. So we ran about 6 different scenarios when we put the project brief together. There's an early option to purchase for IQE, and if the company was bought out, or we would get our money back. That's all built into the agreement. So it's not just that we get our money back, we get an interest payment because it has to be state aid compliant. So we covered every angle off in terms of what if something goes wrong with IQE. But you are right, something could go wrong with any company at any time, and IQE were targeted by short sellers probably about 3-4 months ago. It was 6 months ago probably. It was in the press, and they were particularly targeted not because of their arrangement with us, but for a joint venture arrangement they have with Cardiff University because of the way the accounting was presented. That did impact their share price, but their long-term investors rallied. The share price recovered within a matter of weeks. And as I say, Credit Suisse, AIM, and we're in touch with the Nomad, the link person at AIM, because they're an AIM-listed company. Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley and Barclays, their funders, all put reports out into the market to say this is a red herring. This is a smokescreen. The company is demonstrating growth, and luckily at the end of March they released their year end, which, as I say, showed 100% growth in their key growth segments and a better than expected bottom line. So they smashed their targets, which I think brought real strength and optimism back to their market. But those things can happen at any time, and short sellers will target these companies with high growth trajectories. But as I say, we're in touch with AIM. We've got a key contact person there. So we're able to get that independent analysis almost instantaneously. Going back to your point about the Sevenside area, again, I'd throw the challenge back. I think this is for Monmouthshire to make an offer into the city deal, to say, right, these are our strengths, this is what we can offer. The bridge tolls are going down. We could be the closest point of proximity for business relocations. This is our package, this is our prospectus. We've got fantastic environments. And I think that would give leverage for things like connectivity and the metro. I think it would give leverage for things like the Tech Venture Capital Fund. Because I think the reason CREO came in was because Innovation Point worked with them, and they pulled like one of the biggest Innovate UK grants into Wales on the back of this company. So it's kind of repeating and scaling that success. But I think for Monmouthshire, we just come into that Severn Valley cyber launch pad with Gloucester and GCHQ and partners in Worcester and so on. So I think a lot of this is about the way that we market ourselves and the offer that we put into the region in order to get those asks out.
Okay. Can I thank the Chief Officer for Enterprise for a presentation and an update. I know Councillor Blake-Brad had a query about governance moving forward and how we do that. Hazel, do you want to update us on that?
Yes, I did sort of mention it in the pre-meeting, but basically it's been identified that we need a formal joint scrutiny arrangement. We've spoken about this for many months, and that would be in addition to the scrutiny that would be undertaken by the individual councils, but it would be distinct and separate. So, for instance, the sort of scrutiny that the Joint Scrutiny Committee would look at is the business plan, the strategic direction, the accounts, the finances, all the sort of corporate things that would straddle the whole of the actual board's operation, whereas this committee obviously is going to be more interested in what Monmouthshire is getting out of the city deal. So the proposal will be for one member from each of the authorities to be nominated onto the Joint Scrutiny Committee. I'll bring a report back to your next meeting on the 7th of June, which will give you a bit of an outline of the suggested governance structure. The role will not be a paid one, and if any member wanted to put themselves forward as chair and express an interest, there also isn't a payment for that. But it's not politically balanced either. So the idea is the best person for the job. And I think it would be worthwhile if it was somebody from this committee, because obviously we'd have the clear link into this committee reporting back, and it would tie in with the individual scrutiny that you might want to undertake, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a member of this committee. Council would need to approve it, but I'm sure they would take on board the thoughts of this committee if you consider it at the next meeting and have some ideas of how you'd like to proceed. So that will come to the next meeting. It's anticipated the first meeting will be in October and will be a whole sort of day session with sort of a training sort of session in the morning, getting to know the other councillors, and sort of meet and greet and more informal sort of learning environment, followed by agreeing your governance structure in the afternoon and chairing and so forth.
Councillor Bigby.
Yeah, just a quick question. So, so the person that would be on that cabinet to represent us does not have to be an existing cabinet member from Monmouthshire. It could literally be any of the members who can do the job.
It's not just to say it's not a cabinet member, it's a scrutiny member. So this will be the formal scrutiny committee. So it's a scrutiny member, can be anybody from this council, but obviously there's clear links with this committee. It would be sensible if it was somebody from this committee.
Okay, yeah, everyone happy? Thanks, Kelly. Okay, if we move on then to agenda item 7, which is a list of actions arising from the previous meeting. I probably, if we go on to agenda item 8, because some of those items that were actioned have been sort of scheduled in and provisionally penciled in. So if we go to item 8 then, which is the forward work planner. We've got the on the 11th of May and the 15th of May, the 2 workshops that we discussed earlier on. I'm conscious that we're sort of parking slightly the marketing one, although Councillor Becker has proposed someone to potentially, or has identified someone to come in to speak to us on that and do some work. Do you want to say something on that, Jez?
Yeah, I mean, you may remember Professor Webber, who came in at the procurement thing. He has a PhD student who's been working on identifying what makes a successful hub. And as we were talking about the possibility of trying to engender a hub culture, shared workspaces as part of the marketing, you know, he's I think in his second, third year. So I mean, he's done a good body of work, and apparently is very competent, and I think would be a very useful person to hear from in that regard. I can try and arrange it for either the procurement or park it until we do the marketing one. I mean, it depends. I think it did work quite well in the last workshop, having somebody as a, you know, to sort of get us all our brain juices going. So.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it would fit with the procurement one, if we can weave him in before. It doesn't preclude him from coming back again, but it would be good to have his insights. Do you think that?
Yeah, I mean, I can reach out to him and see if we can come to that one if you want. Yeah. Okay.
So the 2 workshops there. On the 7th, it was to be confirmed, the broadband. But we're looking to move that now to the 19th of July. The offer has been put to Welsh Government to come in, and we're just waiting on that response. So for the 7th, we've had a number of requests for strategic scrutiny from Peter Davis as Chief Officer of Resources. Now, let me just draw up his email, because he's got a number of papers that he'd like us to look at. I can't find it. Yeah, there we go. So he's got strategic papers he wants to put forward for approval on people strategy, digital strategy, strategic assessment management plan, including the new asset investment policy, procurement strategy, which obviously will feed. We have to feed in on that with our workshop, commercialisation strategy and financial strategy. Now, we're not all going to do that in one meeting. We can potentially take 2 or 3 of them in a meeting, and then we're going to have to schedule an additional date, and there's potentially some joint scrutiny with stronger communities as well, on the people one. I think is it Hazel?
I think the people one would probably best sit with strong communities, but as you can see, the rest of the list that the chair's given, it would be too much to accommodate in one meeting on the 7th of June. So the proposal would be that you have a special meeting, and I've got 2 dates to suggest to you. That's the afternoon of the 12th of June, or the morning or afternoon of the 14th of June. Because I'm kind of anticipating you wouldn't want a full day meeting on the 7th of June, but I could be wrong. Members' thoughts, really.
I mean, a full day meeting is not unprecedented, but I'm obviously conscious on pressures on members' diaries. So any thoughts at this stage, or do you want to come back to me via email, Councillor Becker?
Just to say, the 14th of June, there may be something of interest to members of this committee in that I'm part of it's a political group. We're running a evening session in which we're having Lord Clement Jones, who's the expert on artificial intelligence, come to talk at the Drill Hall on the potential of AI and its effect on the economy. Everybody welcome. I would have thought that it would be of interest to some of the members of this committee, and therefore maybe doing 3 things on one day might be a bit much. So, that's the 14th of June at the moment. Yeah, I mean, that date may change, but at the moment that's what it is. So.
Sorry, Councillor Devi, can you just put your...
I'm not averse to a double header on the 7th, if that's what it takes.
Would you prefer to have an all-day meeting on the 7th, or would you prefer to have the morning of the 7th and the afternoon of the 12th?
For me, if you do it on the 7th, it frees up the rest of the diary.
It looks like the consensus is then to do an all-day session on the 7th. There will obviously be relevant breaks throughout the day. Okay, thank you for that steer then. In terms of other elements that link into the forward work programme, and obviously in terms of the actions, the local government finance, we've offered a discussion with audit on this, and it's up to members really whether they want audit to deal with it and take it forward, or we do it in a wider member seminar and open it up to the whole of the council and sort of host it and chair it like we did with the LDP meeting pre-Christmas. I know there'd be a lot of interest on that, and I'm sure colleagues from Powys will be interested as well, because they like us are significantly affected by the local government funding formula. So it's up to members if you want to widen it up and we host it. Are you happy for us to do that? Yeah, okay. We'll look to schedule that then. In terms of the artificial intelligence and automation, as Hazel said, I think Democratic Services are looking to take this forward as a piece of work. I think it was Jez and Alan that initially sort of mooted this idea at the last meeting. Oh, sorry, was it you, Richard? Was it you? Yeah, sorry, Richard. So they want. Or the chair would like some discussion with you about some of the core objectives around that for them, and they can take that and they'll certainly feed that work back to us. So are you happy to have that discussion?
Yes, Chair, no problem. Thank you.
Right. And another element that was suggested, and just thinking about the affordable housing, I know it will feed in with our cross-border stuff, but I'm just wondering if. Again, like the local government finance, whether we want to host a wider seminar with other colleagues to talk about this in more detail. Yeah, Councillor Becker.
I'd agree to widen it out. One of the things that I did, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, I took some of the planning officers up to see the Legal and General factory that's doing the modular wooden builds. So I think that there is a lot of input that is so cross strata. We should do it.
And if we do it, not saying less formal, but in an open style, which will allow members to be more open with their views, I think that'll be
and likewise
helpful.
The officers as well. I think we need that.
So workshop, okay. We'll look to schedule that in then. And I think that's everything on the agenda. Unless anything members have anything else they'd like to raise at this stage. Agenda item 9 is the Cabinet Business Forward Work Programme. Members have the opportunity to look at that and whether or not they consider anything that they should be brought back in or would like to see us look at in further detail. If not at this stage, just let me know, let myself and Hazel know if there's anything you want us to bring in. And then item 10, the date of the next meeting is the 7th, and we'll look to do that all-day session on the 7th. So look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much for your cooperation, participation. Can I thank you all, the guests from Powys as well. Hope you found this fruitful, and we'll sort of convene for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have a discussion then about the meeting. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. If any other members want to stay as well for the discussion, they're more than welcome. It's not just for me, but if you want to stay, David, for the discussion, it's up to you.